The morning sun cast long shadows across the military parade ground as Captain Sarah Mitchell adjusted her uniform one final time. Today was the annual commendation ceremony, and hundreds of soldiers, officers, and civilians had gathered to witness the recognition of outstanding service members. Sarah had been selected to receive the Medal of Valor for her heroic actions during a recent peacekeeping mission overseas. She stood in formation with other recipients, her heart beating steadily despite the magnitude of the moment. The ceremony represented the culmination of 15 years of dedicated military service, rising through the ranks from a young lieutenant fresh out of the academy to a respected captain known for her tactical brilliance and unwavering moral compass. Colonel Marcus Hartwell stepped up to the podium, his chest adorned with ribbons and medals that told the story of a decorated career spanning 3 decades. He was a towering figure in the military community, known for his strict adherence to protocol and his reputation as someone who demanded absolute respect from his subordinates. His voice boomed across the parade ground as he began reading the citations for each award recipient. The crowd listened attentively as names were called and medals presented. Family members beamed with pride from the viewing stands, cameras capturing these precious moments of recognition and honor. The ceremony proceeded smoothly, each recipient stepping forward to receive their award with dignity and gratitude. When Colonel Hartwell called Sarah's name, she marched forward with precision, her polished boots clicking against the concrete in perfect rhythm. The crowd's applause filled the air as she approached the podium, maintaining the professional demeanor that had earned her the respect of her peers and superiors alike. But, as Sarah reached the designated position, something unexpected happened. Instead of presenting the medal with the customary words of congratulation, Colonel Hartwell's expression darkened. His voice, which had been ceremonial and respectful for the previous recipients, suddenly turned harsh and accusatory. "Captain Mitchell," he began, his words carrying across the silent parade ground through the microphone system, "while you stand here today supposedly deserving of this honor, there are serious questions about your conduct that need to be addressed." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Sarah's family members, who had traveled from across the country to witness this proud moment, exchanged confused glances. Fellow soldiers in formation maintained their positions but could feel the tension building in the air. Colonel Hartwell continued his unexpected verbal assault, his voice growing more aggressive with each word. "Your actions during the peacekeeping mission, while perhaps appearing heroic to some, showed a blatant disregard for direct orders and chain of command. You endangered the lives of your fellow soldiers through your reckless decision-making." Sarah stood motionless, her military training keeping her at attention even as shock and confusion washed over her. The accusations were not only false but completely contradicted the official reports and testimonies that had led to her nomination for the Medal of Valor. She had saved the lives of 12 civilians trapped in a building under attack, coordinating a successful rescue operation while under heavy fire. The colonel's voice rose to nearly a shout as he detailed a litany of alleged infractions and character flaws, painting Sarah as an unfit officer who had somehow manipulated her way to the ceremony. The personal nature of his attacks went far beyond any professional criticism, delving into cruel commentary about her capabilities and worth as both a soldier and a person. Hundreds of spectators watched in stunned silence as this public humiliation unfolded. Some began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing that what they were witnessing went far beyond any normal military discipline or correction. This was something else entirely, a deliberate and calculated attempt to destroy someone's reputation and career in the most public way possible. Sarah's mother covered her mouth in horror, unable to comprehend why her daughter was being subjected to such treatment during what should have been a moment of triumph. Her father, himself a veteran, recognized the impropriety of the colonel's actions but felt powerless to intervene in a military ceremony. Other officers on the reviewing stand exchanged worried glances, some beginning to understand that Colonel Hartwell had gone far beyond the bounds of appropriate conduct. Major Peterson, Sarah's immediate supervisor, clenched his jaw as he listened to accusations he knew to be completely unfounded, based on his first-hand knowledge of Sarah's exemplary service record. The colonel showed no signs of stopping his tirade. His face had grown red with apparent anger, though those who knew him well might have recognized something else in his expression, a satisfaction that suggested this public destruction was exactly what he had planned. The ceremony that was meant to honor brave service members had become a platform for what appeared to be a personal vendetta.
Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening.
She thought of her years of dedicated service, the countless hours of training, the missions where she had put her life on the line for her country and her fellow soldiers. She remembered the faces of the civilians she had rescued, the grateful families who had thanked her for bringing their loved ones home safely. The weight of the moment pressed down on her as she realized that her entire career, her reputation, and her future in the military were being systematically dismantled in front of hundreds of witnesses. The colonel's words continued to pour out, each accusation more damaging than the last, designed to leave no doubt in anyone's mind that she was unworthy of any recognition or respect. Some spectators began to look away, uncomfortable with witnessing such a public humiliation. Others leaned forward, unable to believe what they were seeing unfold at what should have been a dignified military ceremony. The other award recipients remained in formation, uncertain whether they should maintain their positions or react to this unprecedented breach of protocol. As Colonel Hartwell's voice echoed across the parade ground, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of accepting this attack passively, instead of allowing herself to be destroyed without response, she chose to act. What happened next would be talked about for years to come, becoming legendary within military circles and inspiring countless others who found themselves facing impossible situations. The crowd held its breath as Sarah began to move, her actions about to transform this moment of humiliation into something entirely unexpected. The colonel continued his verbal assault, unaware that his victim was about to respond in a way that would expose his true character and turn the tables completely. The sun continued to shine down on the parade ground, but the atmosphere had changed forever. What began as a ceremony to honor courage and service had become the stage for a confrontation that would reveal the true meaning of both honor and justice. The hundreds of witnesses present would never forget what they saw that day, and Sarah Mitchell was about to show them what real courage looked like when faced with the ultimate test. The moment of truth had arrived, and Sarah was ready to meet it head-on, knowing that her response would define not just this day, but the rest of her life and career. The colonel had chosen his battlefield, but he was about to discover that he had gravely underestimated his opponent. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice cutting through the colonel's continued tirade with crystal-clear authority. "Sir, I respectfully request permission to respond to these allegations."
The parade ground fell into absolute silence.
Colonel Hartwell paused mid-sentence, clearly not expecting any response from his target. His eyes narrowed as he stared down at Sarah, his surprise quickly transforming into anger at what he perceived as insubordination. "Captain Mitchell, you will remain silent until dismissed," he barked into the microphone, his voice carrying a threatening edge that made several spectators shift uncomfortably in their seats.
But Sarah didn't step back.
Instead, she maintained her position and spoke again, her voice steady and professional despite the circumstances. "Sir, according to Military Regulation 600-20, any service member has the right to respond to public accusations that could affect their service record and career standing.
I am exercising that right."
A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Many of the military personnel present recognized the regulation Sarah had cited, and they began to realize that she was not only standing up for herself but doing so within the proper legal framework. Colonel Hartwell's face grew even redder as he found himself challenged on procedural grounds in front of hundreds of witnesses. Major Peterson stepped forward from the reviewing stand, his own understanding of military law compelling him to intervene.
"Colonel, the captain is correct.
Regulation 600-20 does provide for response rights in cases of public allegations." The colonel shot a withering glare at Major Peterson, but he could not dispute the regulation in front of so many witnesses, many of whom were senior officers themselves. With visible reluctance, he stepped back from the microphone, gesturing curtly for Sarah to speak. Sarah moved to the microphone with the same precision she had shown throughout her military career. She looked out at the assembled crowd, seeing her family's worried faces, her fellow soldiers' expressions of support, and the mixture of curiosity and concern from the civilian attendees. "Ladies and gentlemen, officers and enlisted personnel," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the parade ground, "I stand before you today not just as a recipient of the Medal of Valor, but as someone who has dedicated her entire adult life to serving our country with honor and integrity." She paused, allowing her words to settle before continuing. "The colonel has made serious allegations about my conduct during Operation Desert Shield, specifically regarding the rescue mission that led to my nomination for this award. I believe you deserve to hear the facts." Sarah reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a folded document. "This is the official after-action report filed by Major Peterson, my commanding officer during that mission. It details how our unit encountered 12 civilians trapped in a building under heavy enemy fire. The report documents that I requested permission to attempt a rescue, which was initially denied due to the high risk involved." The crowd listened intently as Sarah explained the situation with calm professionalism. When the enemy fire intensified and it became clear that the civilians would not survive without immediate intervention, I made the decision to act. However, I did not act alone or without consideration for my fellow soldiers. She looked directly at several soldiers in the formation who had served with her on that mission. Sergeant Williams, Corporal Jackson, and Private Martinez voluntarily joined the rescue effort. Together, we successfully extracted all 12 civilians without losing a single American life. Our actions were later reviewed and approved by a board of senior officers, leading to commendations for the entire team. Colonel Hartwell's jaw tightened as Sarah systematically dismantled his accusations with documented facts. She continued, "The colonel has suggested that I disobeyed direct orders and endangered my fellow soldiers. I ask you to consider this. Would a board of senior officers recommend someone for the Medal of Valor if their actions truly represented the kind of misconduct he describes?" Sarah's mother watched with growing pride as her daughter transformed what had begun as a moment of humiliation into a powerful defense of truth and justice. Other family members of the award recipients found themselves drawn into Sarah's story, recognizing the courage it took to stand up against such a public attack. Furthermore, Sarah continued, "I have here letters of support from the families of the civilians we rescued that day." She held up another set of documents. "These families, who lost their homes but kept their lives because of our actions, have written to express their gratitude not just to me, but to every member of our rescue team." The crowd began to shift their attention from Colonel Hartwell to Sarah, drawn by her calm presentation of facts and her obvious sincerity. Some spectators started to wonder what had motivated the colonel's attack and why he seemed so determined to destroy the reputation of an officer who clearly had strong support from her peers and superiors. Sarah took another step forward, her confidence growing as she realized she had the crowd's attention and support. "I want to address something else that troubles me about this situation. Colonel Hartwell has used this ceremony, which should honor all of today's recipients, as a platform for personal attacks that have no basis in fact or regulation." She gestured toward the other award recipients who remained in formation. "These brave men and women deserve better than to have their moment of recognition overshadowed by unfounded accusations and character assassination. They have earned their honors through service and sacrifice, just as I believe I have earned mine." The other recipients straightened their shoulders, clearly moved by Sarah's words and her decision to include them in her defense. Several officers in the reviewing stand began to nod in agreement, recognizing that Sarah was not only defending herself but also protecting the integrity of the entire ceremony. Colonel Hartwell attempted to regain control of the situation, stepping toward the microphone with obvious anger. "Captain Mitchell, you have said enough. Return to your position immediately." But Sarah wasn't finished. She had one more card to play, one that would change everything about this confrontation. "Sir, before I conclude, I believe the assembled witnesses should know about the conversation you and I had 3 weeks ago in your office." A hush fell over the entire parade ground. Colonel Hartwell froze, his face losing some of its color as he realized where Sarah was heading with this revelation. 3 weeks ago, Colonel Hartwell called me to his office for what he described as a routine meeting about my upcoming commendation. During that meeting, he made it clear that he believed women had no place in combat roles and that my medal was nothing more than politically correct nonsense designed to promote what he called the feminist agenda in the military. Gasps could be heard from various parts of the crowd. Several female officers in attendance exchanged knowing looks, recognizing the type of discrimination Sarah was describing. The colonel's face went from red to pale as his private prejudices were exposed in the most public way possible. Sarah's voice remained steady and professional as she delivered the most damaging revelation. "The colonel informed me that if I accepted this medal, he would make sure that my military career was over. He said he had the influence to have me transferred to what he called more appropriate duties for someone of my gender. When I refused to withdraw my name from consideration for the Medal of Valor, he promised that he would find a way to destroy my reputation publicly. The parade ground erupted in murmurs and whispered conversations. Many spectators looked toward Colonel Hartwell with expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust. The other officers on the reviewing stand began to distance themselves physically from the colonel, their body language making clear that they did not support his actions or attitudes. Sarah concluded her response with words that would be remembered and quoted for years to come. "I stand here today not just to receive an honor, but to represent every service member who has faced discrimination, intimidation, or abuse of power. The military I love and serve is stronger when it values merit over prejudice, courage over politics, and truth over personal agendas."
The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming.
Applause began from scattered individuals and quickly grew into thunderous approval from nearly everyone present.
Sarah's family members stood and cheered, joined by hundreds of others who had witnessed an extraordinary display of courage under fire.
Colonel Hartwell stood frozen at the podium, his carefully planned character assassination completely backfired. He had expected to destroy Sarah Mitchell's career and reputation, but instead had exposed his own prejudices and abuse of power to hundreds of witnesses, many of whom were his peers and superiors in the military hierarchy. As the applause continued, Sarah remained at attention, having transformed a moment of intended humiliation into a triumph of truth and justice that would inspire others for years to come. The thunderous applause continued for nearly 5 minutes, with more and more people rising to their feet in support of Sarah's courageous stand. Colonel Hartwell looked around desperately, realizing that he had lost complete control of the situation and that his reputation was crumbling before his eyes. General Patricia Hayes, who had been observing from the VIP section, stood up and began walking toward the podium. As the commanding officer of the entire military district, her presence immediately commanded attention, and the crowd gradually quieted to hear what she would say. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Hayes announced as she took the microphone, "what we have witnessed today represents both the best and worst of military leadership. Captain Mitchell has demonstrated exactly the kind of courage and integrity that makes our armed forces strong, while Colonel Hartwell has shown us what happens when personal prejudice overrides professional duty." The general's words carried the weight of absolute authority, and everyone present understood that this situation had escalated far beyond a simple disagreement between officers. General Hayes had a reputation for fairness but also for taking swift action when misconduct was revealed. "Colonel Hartwell," she continued, turning to face him directly, "your conduct today is not only inappropriate but potentially illegal under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You will report to my office immediately following this ceremony, and I am ordering an immediate investigation into your allegations against Captain Mitchell as well as your own conduct." Colonel Hartwell's face had gone completely pale. He stammered an attempt at a response, but General Hayes cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You have said quite enough for one day, Colonel. Your microphone privileges are revoked for the remainder of this ceremony." The crowd watched as military police officers, who had been summoned during Sarah's speech, approached Colonel Hartwell. While they did not arrest him immediately, their presence made it clear that he was under official scrutiny and that his actions would have serious consequences. General Hayes turned back to Sarah, who had maintained her position at attention throughout this dramatic turn of events. "Captain Mitchell, please step forward to receive your Medal of Valor. You have more than earned it, both through your heroic actions overseas and your courage here today." As Sarah approached, General Hayes spoke into the microphone so everyone could hear. "The Medal of Valor is awarded to those who demonstrate extraordinary courage in the face of danger. Today, Captain Mitchell has shown us that true courage sometimes means standing up for truth and justice even when facing seemingly insurmountable odds." The general pinned the medal to Sarah's uniform with ceremonial precision, then shook her hand warmly. "Your response to Colonel Hartwell's attack was textbook military bearing under extreme pressure. You cited proper regulations, presented factual evidence, and maintained your professionalism throughout. This is leadership at its finest." The crowd erupted in another round of applause, but this time it was purely celebratory. Sarah's family members were openly crying with pride and relief, while her fellow soldiers beamed with admiration for their colleague's strength and dignity. Major Peterson stepped forward to join the presentation, carrying additional documents. "General Hayes, if I may, I would like to present some additional information that supports Captain Mitchell's account of events."
With the general's permission, Major Peterson addressed the crowd.
Following Colonel Hartwell's attack on Captain Mitchell, several officers have come forward with their own experiences of discrimination and intimidation at his hands. Additionally, we have documented evidence of other occasions when the colonel has abused his authority to target officers who didn't conform to his personal biases.
He held up a thick folder of documents.
These complaints were previously filed through proper channels but were somehow never acted upon. It appears that Colonel Hartwell had been using his influence to suppress investigations into his own conduct while simultaneously threatening the careers of those who opposed him.
The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd.
Many officers and enlisted personnel began to realize that what they had witnessed was not an isolated incident but part of a pattern of abuse that had been hidden from public view. Sarah found herself at the center of something much larger than her individual situation. Her decision to stand up to Colonel Hartwell had inadvertently exposed a network of discrimination and corruption that had been festering within the military hierarchy for years. General Hayes took the microphone again, her expression grave. "This information will be thoroughly investigated, and anyone who participated in covering up misconduct will face appropriate consequences. The military cannot and will not tolerate officers who abuse their authority or discriminate against personnel based on gender, race, or any other factor unrelated to their service performance." The ceremony continued with the remaining award presentations, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Instead of the routine formality that had characterized the beginning of the event, there was now a sense of historic significance. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed a turning point, a moment when truth had triumphed over corruption and courage had overcome intimidation. As other recipients received their awards, many made brief comments thanking Sarah for her bravery and expressing support for her actions. The solidarity among the service members was palpable, creating a sense of unity that transcended rank and position. Sarah's parents were finally able to approach her after the ceremony concluded. Her mother embraced her tightly, whispering, "I have never been more proud of you than I am right now.
You showed everyone what real strength looks like."
Her father, fighting back tears, added, "You honored not just yourself today, but everyone who has ever served."
That took more courage than any battlefield action could require. Fellow officers and enlisted personnel formed lines to congratulate Sarah and express their support.
Many shared their own stories of discrimination or abuse, thanking her for giving them hope that change was possible within the military structure. Sergeant Williams, who had served with Sarah on the rescue mission, approached with the other members of their team.
"Captain, we always knew you had our backs in combat. Today you showed that you'll have our backs here at home too. That means everything to us."
The media, who had been present to cover the routine ceremony, found themselves documenting a story that would make national headlines.
Reporters approached Sarah for interviews, recognizing that her actions represented something significant in the ongoing struggle for equality and justice in the military.
Local television crews captured footage of the ceremony, particularly Sarah's speech and General Hayes' response. The video would later go viral on social media, inspiring people far beyond the military community who saw Sarah's courage as a symbol of standing up to bullying and discrimination in all its forms. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few hours. She had arrived expecting a routine ceremony to recognize her military service, but instead had found herself at the center of a confrontation that would reshape her career and potentially impact military culture for years to come. The Medal of Valor pinned to her uniform represented more than just recognition for her actions overseas. It had become a symbol of her willingness to fight for justice and truth, even when the personal cost could have been devastating. Colonel Hartwell, meanwhile, was escorted from the grounds by military police, his distinguished career effectively over. His attempt to destroy Sarah had instead exposed his own corruption and prejudice, serving as a powerful reminder that abuse of power ultimately leads to downfall. As the sun set over the parade ground, Sarah knew that this day would be remembered not for the attack she had endured, but for the courage she had shown in responding to it. Her unbelievable actions had transformed a moment of intended humiliation into a triumph that would inspire others to stand up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. The days following the ceremony brought a whirlwind of activity and attention that Sarah had never experienced before. The video of her confrontation with Colonel Hartwell had spread across social media platforms, news websites, and television networks, making her a household name virtually overnight. Major news outlets reached out for interviews, wanting to hear more details about both her Medal of Valor actions and her decision to stand up to the colonel's public attack. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being both a military officer bound by certain protocols and a public figure whose story had captured the nation's attention. The Pentagon issued an official statement supporting Sarah's actions and announcing a comprehensive review of discrimination complaints within the military hierarchy. Secretary of Defense Margaret Thompson personally called Sarah to express the administration's support and to assure her that the investigation into Colonel Hartwell would be thorough and transparent. Captain Mitchell, Secretary Thompson said during their phone conversation, "Your courage in that moment has opened doors for conversations we should have been having years ago. The military is stronger when all service members feel safe to speak truth to power, regardless of rank or position." The investigation moved swiftly, with military investigators uncovering a disturbing pattern of behavior that extended far beyond Sarah's experience. Colonel Hartwell had systematically targeted female officers, minority personnel, and anyone he perceived as challenging traditional military hierarchies. His actions had destroyed promising careers and created a toxic environment within his command structure. Lieutenant Jennifer Rodriguez came forward with her own story of harassment and intimidation at Colonel Hartwell's hands. She had been passed over for promotions despite exemplary performance reviews, and had been subjected to inappropriate comments about her capabilities based on her gender and ethnicity. Her testimony, along with similar accounts from other officers, painted a picture of systemic abuse that had been covered up by a network of complicit senior officers. The investigation also revealed that Colonel Hartwell had been involved in suppressing previous complaints against him, using his connections and influence to prevent proper investigations from taking place. Documents showed that he had threatened the careers of those who attempted to report his misconduct, creating a climate of fear that kept victims silent for years. Sarah found herself testifying before a military tribunal, providing detailed accounts not only of the ceremony incident but also of the threats Colonel Hartwell had made in his office weeks earlier. Her testimony was corroborated by other witnesses and supported by documented evidence of the colonel's discriminatory practices. The media attention brought both positive and negative reactions. Thousands of current and former military personnel reached out to express their support and share their own stories of discrimination and abuse. Many credited Sarah with giving them the courage to come forward with complaints they had previously been afraid to file. However, some critics argued that Sarah had violated military protocols by publicly confronting a superior officer, regardless of the circumstances. These voices suggested that she should have followed traditional channels for addressing grievances rather than creating a public spectacle at the ceremony. Sarah addressed these criticisms directly during a televised interview with a respected military journalist. "I understand the concern about military protocol and chain of command," she said. "However, when that same chain of command has been used to protect abusers and silence victims, sometimes extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary responses." She continued, "I tried to address Colonel Hartwell's threats through proper channels. I filed a complaint with his superiors, but it was dismissed without investigation. I was told that the colonel's comments were probably just old-fashioned thinking that I should ignore. When he chose to attack me publicly at the ceremony, I had no choice but to defend myself and the truth in the same public forum." The interview resonated with viewers across the country, many of whom recognized similar patterns in their own workplaces and communities. Sarah's story became a catalyst for broader discussions about harassment, discrimination, and the importance of speaking truth to power in all sectors of society. Educational institutions began inviting Sarah to speak about leadership, courage, and moral decision-making. Her presentation at the Naval Academy was particularly impactful, as she addressed future military officers about their responsibilities to protect and support their fellow service members regardless of gender, race, or background. "Leadership isn't just about giving orders or following protocol," she told the midshipmen.
True leadership means standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult or dangerous.
It means protecting those who serve under you and beside you, and never allowing your personal biases to influence your professional decisions. The investigation's findings were released 6 months after the ceremony, revealing the full scope of Colonel Hartwell's misconduct and the systematic failures that had allowed it to continue. The report documented dozens of incidents of discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power, affecting more than 40 service members over a period of 12 years.
Colonel Hartwell was court-martialed on multiple charges including conduct unbecoming an officer, abuse of authority, and discrimination.
The proceedings were closely watched by military personnel and civilians alike, as they represented a significant step toward accountability within the military justice system. During the court-martial, Sarah was called as a key witness. Her testimony was clear, factual, and devastating to the colonel's defense. She provided detailed accounts of his threats, his discriminatory comments, and his attempt to destroy her career through public humiliation. The prosecution also presented evidence of Colonel Hartwell's pattern of targeting female and minority officers, showing that his attack on Sarah was not an isolated incident but part of a deliberate campaign of intimidation and discrimination. Phone records, email communications, and witness testimony painted a comprehensive picture of systematic abuse of power. Colonel Hartwell's defense team attempted to portray him as a dedicated officer whose old-fashioned views had been misinterpreted in the modern military environment. They argued that his comments and actions were reflective of his generation's military culture rather than intentional discrimination. However, this defense fell apart when prosecutors presented evidence of Colonel Hartwell's deliberate efforts to suppress complaints against him and his threats against those who opposed his actions. His own words, recorded in official documents and witness statements, demonstrated clear intent to discriminate and intimidate. The court-martial resulted in Colonel Hartwell's conviction on all charges. He was sentenced to dismissal from the service, forfeiture of all pay and benefits, and confinement for 2 years. The sentence sent a clear message throughout the military that discrimination and abuse of power would no longer be tolerated or covered up. Sarah watched the proceedings with mixed emotions. While she felt vindicated by the conviction, she also recognized that the damage caused by Colonel Hartwell's actions could never be fully undone. Careers had been destroyed, lives had been affected, and trust in military leadership had been shaken among many service members. The broader investigation led to additional disciplinary actions against officers who had enabled Colonel Hartwell's misconduct through their silence or complicity. Several senior officers faced reprimands, demotions, or forced retirements for their failure to properly investigate complaints or for actively covering up misconduct. These consequences sent ripple effects throughout the military hierarchy, encouraging other victims of discrimination and abuse to come forward with their own complaints. The military justice system found itself dealing with a backlog of cases that had previously been ignored or suppressed. Sarah's role in exposing this systemic corruption made her a symbol of positive change within the military. She received numerous awards and commendations from civilian organizations recognizing her courage and leadership in standing up to discrimination and abuse of power. However, she remained focused on her military duties and her commitment to serving her country. The attention and recognition were gratifying, but Sarah understood that real change would require sustained effort and vigilance from all levels of military leadership. 2 years after the ceremony that changed everything, Sarah found herself promoted to major and assigned to a prestigious position at the Pentagon, working directly on military personnel policy reforms. Her experience and the national attention her case had received made her a natural choice for helping to implement systemic changes designed to prevent future discrimination and abuse. The reforms that grew out of the investigation into Colonel Hartwell's conduct were comprehensive and far-reaching. New protocols were established for reporting and investigating discrimination complaints, with independent oversight to prevent the kind of suppression that had protected abusers in the past. Training programs were implemented at all levels to educate military personnel about their rights and responsibilities regarding equal treatment and professional conduct. Sarah's office became a resource center for service members facing discrimination or harassment. She worked with a team of legal experts, counselors, and fellow officers to ensure that complaints were properly investigated and that victims received appropriate support throughout the process. The work was challenging but deeply meaningful, as she helped create the kind of military environment she had always believed was possible. The impact of her confrontation with Colonel Hartwell extended far beyond the military. Corporate America took notice of her story, with many companies implementing their own reforms to address workplace harassment and discrimination. Sarah received invitations to speak at business conferences, universities, and leadership seminars, sharing her insights about courage, integrity, and organizational change. During one particularly memorable speech at a Fortune 500 company's leadership retreat, Sarah addressed an audience of executives about the importance of creating environments where employees feel safe to speak up about problems. The test of any organization's integrity, she told them, is not whether problems exist, they always do. The test is whether people feel safe to identify and address those problems before they become systemic failures.
Her message resonated with business leaders who recognized similar dynamics in their own organizations.
Many companies began implementing anonymous reporting systems, independent investigation processes, and leadership training programs based on the military reforms that Sarah had helped develop.
The story also inspired legislative action.
Congress passed the Military Accountability and Reform Act, which strengthened protections for whistleblowers and created additional oversight mechanisms for investigating misconduct within the armed forces. Sarah was invited to testify during the legislative hearings, providing expert insight based on her experiences and her work on reform implementation. Senator Patricia Williams, who chaired the relevant committee, introduced Sarah to the hearing with words that captured the significance of her impact. Major Mitchell represents the best of American values, the courage to stand up for what's right, even when facing powerful opposition. Her actions 2 years ago didn't just save her own career, they helped save the integrity of our military institutions.
The personal cost of Sarah's stand had been significant but, ultimately worthwhile.
While some military traditionalists continued to view her actions as inappropriate, the overwhelming response from her peers and superiors had been supportive. Her career had advanced rapidly, and she had been given opportunities to make meaningful contributions to military reform that would benefit future generations of service members. Her relationship with her family had grown stronger through the experience. Her parents, who had initially been terrified by the confrontation they witnessed at the ceremony, had become her biggest supporters and advocates. They attended many of her speaking engagements and were proud to see their daughter using her experience to help others. Sarah's mother often reflected on the day of the ceremony, marveling at her daughter's composure under such extreme pressure. "I knew Sarah was brave from her military service," she would tell friends, "but I had no idea she had that kind of courage. To stand up to someone with that much power, in front of all those people, and do it with such dignity and intelligence, that takes a special kind of strength." The lasting impact on Colonel Hartwell served as a cautionary tale throughout the military. His disgraceful dismissal and imprisonment had ended a career that could have concluded with honor if he had chosen to treat all service members with respect and fairness. His case was frequently cited in leadership training as an example of how personal prejudices and abuse of power could destroy not only victims' careers but also the abuser's own legacy. Several of the officers who had been victimized by Colonel Hartwell's discrimination were able to revive their careers with the support of the new system Sarah had helped implement. Lieutenant Rodriguez, whose testimony had been crucial in the court-martial, was promoted to captain and given a leadership position in the military's new Equal Opportunity Office. Her experience as a victim of discrimination made her particularly effective in helping other service members navigate similar challenges. The ceremony location where everything had happened was renamed the Mitchell Memorial Parade Ground in Sarah's honor, recognizing not just her Medal of Valor but her contribution to military reform. The dedication ceremony drew hundreds of current and former service members who wanted to honor her courage and commitment to justice. General Hayes, who had supported Sarah during the original confrontation, spoke at the dedication ceremony. "This ground will forever remind us that true courage isn't just about facing enemy fire on foreign battlefields. Sometimes the greatest courage is required right here at home, when we must confront injustice within our own ranks and stand up for the values we have sworn to protect." Sarah's influence extended to the next generation of military leaders through her work with military academies and officer training programs. She developed curriculum focused on ethical leadership, moral courage, and creating inclusive command environments. Her lessons were based not just on theoretical principles but on real-world experience of what happened when leaders failed to live up to these ideals. The annual lecture series she established at West Point became one of the most popular and well-attended events in the Academy's calendar. Cadets were drawn to her authentic approach to discussing leadership challenges and her willingness to share both successes and failures from her own career. One cadet approached her after a particularly impactful lecture and said, "Major Mitchell, your story gives me hope that I can make a difference in the military, even if I face opposition from people with more power than me. You showed that doing the right thing can win, even when it seems impossible." The ripple effects of that day at the ceremony continued to spread through American society. Sarah's story became a case study in business schools, taught as an example of effective crisis communication and moral leadership under pressure. Her decision to cite military regulations while defending herself became a model for how to challenge authority appropriately while remaining within legal and professional boundaries. Media coverage of military reforms often referenced Sarah's case as the catalyst that had forced the armed forces to confront long-standing problems with discrimination and harassment. Journalists frequently sought her perspective on new developments in military policy and on broader issues of workplace equality and justice. 5 years after the ceremony, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had changed from that single moment of decision. She could have remained silent, accepted the public humiliation, and hoped that the truth would eventually emerge through proper channels. Instead, her choice to speak up had not only saved her own career but had initiated reforms that would protect countless other service members for years to come. The Medal of Valor she had received that day remained one of her most treasured possessions, not just for the heroic actions it represented overseas, but for the courage it had come to symbolize in standing up to injustice at home. The medal served as a daily reminder that true valor sometimes means facing enemies within your own ranks who threaten the values and integrity of the institutions you serve. Sarah's unbelievable response to Colonel Hartwell's attack had proven that one person's courage could indeed change an entire system. Her story became legendary not just within military circles but throughout American society as an example of how individuals can stand up to corruption and discrimination, even when facing seemingly insurmountable odds. The transformation from that day of intended humiliation to a career dedicated to military reform represented the best outcome possible from a terrible situation. Sarah had turned her moment of greatest professional challenge into a lifetime mission of ensuring that future service members would never have to face the kind of discrimination and abuse that had once threatened to destroy careers and dreams. As she continued her work at the Pentagon, developing new policies and supporting victims of discrimination, Sarah knew that the real measure of her success would not be found in personal accolades or career advancement. The true victory would be achieved when no service member ever again had to make the choice between accepting abuse silently or risking everything to speak the truth. That goal remained her driving motivation, inspiring her daily work and reminding her that the courage she had shown that day at the ceremony was not a single act of defiance but the beginning of a lifelong commitment to justice, equality, and the highest ideals of military service. Her unbelievable actions had created unbelievable change, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply the courage to stand up and speak the truth.